All right, so I'm going to walk you through the Chapter 11 Complex Inheritance and Human Heredity worksheet. All right, so this is not all of Chapter 11. This is just a small portion, but I wanted to make sure that we talked about this because this is really important for understanding the rest of the chapter here. All right, so before we get started, I have to make sure that we understand some basic terminology here, okay? These are terms from chapter 10. All right, so for an allele, okay, an allele is the gene on a chromosome that determines the characteristics that is passed down through generations, okay? The genome type is a combination of those alleles, okay, that gives a specific gene. All right, then the phenotype is a combination of genes, okay? That is the genes plus the physical environment to make that physical characteristic, okay? And then genome is the total DNA in each cell of the nucleus, so right, it's that whole human code, all right? So for example, an allele might be, let's go, a capital B or a lowercase b. All right, your genome type would be something like, let's say, I don't know, BB. Okay, your phenotype would say, okay, this means you have a, let's say, black hair, all right? And then your genome type would be the combination of black, it's going to be curly, it's going to be thick, right, etc., etc. All right, so those are just some basic definitions here that I hope we are familiar with, and I hope this is all just review, okay? Same thing for Punnett squares, all right? Let me give you a little breather here. We are only going to do monohybrid Punnett squares from here on out, so no more dihybrids, all right? If you can do that, that's awesome, but we're going to focus solely on understanding the Punnett squares and understanding what it really means in terms of the physical characteristics or the phenotypes that are generated, all right? But we have to understand how to do it, so I'm going to take a second here and re-explain it to you. All right, so you have one parent on top, you have one parent going down the side here. All right, and it really doesn't matter if you choose to go left to right or top to bottom first. That is a personal preference. I like going left to right first. So for me, I'm going to carry that capital R across, then I'm going to carry my lowercase r across. And then I'm going to go top to bottom, capital R, lowercase, lowercase. All right. Now, genotype ratios, this will always be the same. It's going to be dominant to hetero to recessive. Okay, so in this case, it's going to say how many capital R's to capital lowercase to lowercase, lowercase. All right. Now, if we're just looking at our Punnett square here, our ratio is a 1 to 2 to 1. All right, so I'm going to box in your final answer. Everything else is just the work getting me up to the final answer. If you can look at this immediately and go 1 to 2 to 1, that's all I need. All right, but to remind yourself, it's always going to be dominant to hetero to recessive. All right, now, here's what's going to change, all right? We are going to talk about different inheritance patterns, right? And so right now we are doing the dominant inheritance pattern, okay? But the inheritance patterns really affect these phenotypes or what physical characteristics we are showing, okay? In this example here, since we are only doing dominant, okay, we are only going to have either a dominant or a recessive. So in this example, it is either going to be a red or a white, okay? So for this, if it is dominant, that means if it has any capital letter R, it's going to have that dominant trait. So for this example, we have a 3 to 1 ratio of red to white. So again, boxing in your final answer here. All right, again, I'm pointing out to you there's going to be multiple types of inheritance patterns. And again, the inheritance patterns are going to affect the phenotype ratios. All right, so if we keep moving on here, again, non-Mendelian genetics, that's what we're focusing on. So what we just talked about was what's called Mendelian genetics, right? And now we're going to focus on these more complex types of inheritance, right? It is not an all or nothing kind of case here, right? So there's a couple that we have here: incomplete dominance, codominance, multiple alleles, and epistasis. All right. For the purpose of this worksheet, we're going to focus on 2. That would be incomplete dominance and codominance. All right. We're going to touch on the other 2 later. I do want to highlight in this bottom right-hand corner, I did put the link or sorry, I didn't mean link, the page numbers where you can find it in your book, okay? So you can read up on this if you have more questions, but that's where it's going to be found in your book. Now, I want to stress to you that I really don't want you to memorize these definitions. I want you to break it apart and understand what it means, okay? So we talked about dominant inheritance patterns. And to me, like I said, dominant is an all or nothing situation. If the dominant is there, they're going to take over and take control. Now, if we have something called incomplete dominance, right? Incomplete dominance means they're not fully in control. So if we look at this definition here, it says the heterozygous phenotype is an intermediate phenotype between the two homozygous parent organisms. Again, it sounds like a mouthful. What does that actually mean? So to me, that means that there is a third phenotype that is between the dominant and the recessive, okay? So hold on to that. Again, like I said, it's incomplete dominance. So this dominant one does not necessarily take over. It's not an all or nothing. It's an all, nothing, and then sort of. Okay, and I'll explain that more in a second here. Now, codominance, it says neither allele is dominant and both are expressed. So to me, I just want to highlight that. Both are expressed, okay? Codominant, all right? They are both dominating the situation here, all right? So let's get to it. If we're looking at incomplete dominance, what I want to point out to you here is that, okay, whether you're Mendelian or non-Mendelian, these Punnett squares are going to look identical, right? They are both going to have all four of their boxes filled with capital R, lowercase r, or lowercase capital, however you filled it. All right, so it really doesn't matter. They're both going to look the same. Now, what it's going to do, though, is depending on your type of dominance pattern or inheritance pattern, okay, that's going to determine the physical characteristics that those flowers have. So if we are in Mendelian, right, that is that all or nothing case. So all four of these have that capital R, and capital R means red. So all of these flowers would be red if we were in that Mendelian or, again, all or nothing kind of situation here. Now, if we're doing incomplete dominance, like we just said, that means there's a third phenotype, something between red and something between white. So to me, that means pink, right? So since you have one dominant and one recessive, it means it has a little bit of both. So again, to me, that means you've got a pink phenotype, right? Or pink physical characteristic. All right, so if we scroll down here, this is what you saw in the video, okay? This is what you saw in that Ed Puzzle video that we watched, okay? So again, pointing out Punnett squares are identical. What just differs is the physical characteristic that is observed on the flowers. Okay, so now let's bring that to another example here. So again, incomplete dominance. There's a third phenotype possible, right? Third phenotype possible, and it's between the dominant and the recessive, okay? So if we look at this problem here, we're talking about pea plants, all right? Talking about dominant and recessive heights of pea plants. So the first question I ask you here is at the bottom, okay? Now that we know that incomplete dominance means there must be a third phenotype, what third phenotype do we need to add? So to me, I look at this and I say, all right, I've got tall, which is the dominant, and I've got dwarf, which is the recessive. So what comes between tall and short? And again, to me, there's two words that stick out, but I'm going to write one of them. I think average, right? So if you're not tall, you're not short, maybe you're just average height. Or the other thought I had was medium. If you think of another word that means something between tall and short, absolutely, that makes sense to me, all right? So again, I wrote down the word average for this example. Now that we have our third phenotype, we can fill out our Punnett square and get this rolling here. So let's take a look. It says, in pea plants, tall is dominant to dwarf. Okay, so show the cross between a heterozygous tall and a dwarf homozygous plant. Pause. All right, so heterozygous tall, we're going to put capital T, lowercase t. Dwarf homozygous, lowercase t, lowercase t. All right, so filling out my Punnett square here. I've got my lowercase, I've got my capitals, and then finally my lowercase. All right, so for the genotype, this is very simple here. All right, for homozygous, I only have one example of homozygous. That's lowercase t, lowercase t. And I have 2 squares of that, so that would be 50%, right? I've got half. Heterozygous is my lowercase t, capital T, or again, capital lowercase, depending on how you filled out your Punnett square. All right, so you're going to have 50% of those squares are going to be heterozygous. All right, now, if we go to the phenotype, okay, the phenotype, again, the physical characteristic. Tall, in order to be tall, it would have to be TT. To be dwarf, you would be lowercase t, and to be average, you would be that heterozygous, all right? And since we have 0 plants that are capital, we have 0% tall plants, right? Then we have 50% dwarf, and now 50% average height, okay? So again, this is different than our normal dominant inheritance pattern that we worked on in chapter 10, okay? So again, the key here is you have to pay attention to what is the inheritance pattern that I'm being asked to do, right? So I asked you for incomplete dominance, which means that we no longer have tall and we go to average height plants for heterozygous. Okay, let that sink in for a second. If we scroll down here now to this thing called codominance, okay, you're going to notice it no longer is capital lowercase. It's both capital letters standing for what it is, because again, codominance means they both express that physical trait. They're both showing. So we now have a BW, okay, BW, since we have black chicken on top, white chicken on the left. All right, so there's a couple examples, but basically what this means is you're going to have both black and white being shown at the same time. So maybe it looks something like you've got a black chicken and let's make this maybe white stripes, okay, or white dots or something of the sort. All right, so again, that is just an example here. Okay, what they showed you on the video was that if you mix a black chicken and a white chicken together, it becomes these speckled chickens. So again, that's just another example of you can fully see black and you can fully see white. So we call this thing called codominance. All right, so if we go to codominance here, you can see I wrote the definition. It shows both phenotypes, right? It shows both of those phenotypes. All right, so I'm going to zoom in here so you can read the questions a little bit easier, right? In some chickens, the gene for feather colored is controlled by codominance. Apologies for the spelling mistake, all right? The allele for black is B and the allele for white is W. And then the heterozygous phenotype is known as this ermatitti or also speckled, right? Either word works. Okay, so it asks you, what's the genotype for a black chicken? Well, since we are doing codominance, in order to be a black chicken, it would have to have both letters be B. For a white chicken, opposite end, it'd have to be WW, right? And then for that ermatitti or speckled chicken, it would have to be BW. Or again, if you wanted to write it, or WB. Okay, but I'm going to keep going with BW here. Okay. Now, the second question says, if 2 ermatitti or speckled chickens were crossed, what is the probability that? Pause. Before I even get to the rest of the question here, I'm going to do the Punnett square, right? So it says, my parents are these 2 ermatitti chickens. So you're going to have a black-white mixed with a black-white speckled chicken. So I fill it out. I take that first parent, BW, second parent, BW. Right, if I follow through with my Punnett square here. Okay, if I follow through with my Punnett square here. All right, I'm going to notice I have 1 chicken that is BB, 1 chicken that is WW, and 2 chickens that are BW or WB. Okay, so now it asks you, what is the probability that they would have a black chicken? Well, if we look at the first question, to be a black chicken, you would have to have a BB. So we only have 1 chicken that is like that, so it's a 25% chance. All right, next question. What's the percentage they would have a white chicken, right? Same thing. It'd have to be WW. We have one of those, so that is a 25% chance. All right. Now, last question here. A black and white chicken are crossed. Stop. Okay, that's enough for me. So I'm going to go to the parent. I've got a black chicken mixed with a white chicken. BBWW. So I'm going to fill out my Punnett square. Okay, fill out my Punnett square. You're going to notice all 4 of those squares look identical. They are BW or WB, however you filled it out, right? So next, the rest of the question says, what is the probability that we're going to have an ermitaño chicken or a speckled chicken? Well, to be a speckled chicken, it has to have that BW or WB. So since all 4 of them have that, we're going to say it's 100% chance, all right? 100% chance. All right, and that's pretty much it for codominance. Again, both alleles are being shown fully. Okay. So now we're going to get to this last question here. And I think this is one of the most important questions. Obviously, I want you to be able to do a Punnett square, and I want you to understand how to do that. But if you don't understand what these words mean, you're going to get to that final thing of what's the phenotype, and you might just mess that up. So we have to make sure that we understand what those words really mean here. Okay, I did put this picture in the little right corner that shows flowers and shows a pretty good example of the different types of inheritance patterns. All right, so in your own words, you're going to describe the following, and I'm going to give you, maybe what my definition would be in my own words. But again, as long as you have something similar that means the same thing, whatever you write down is completely fine with me. All right, so if I have a dominant or dominance inheritance pattern, okay, what this means to me is that if there is a dominant allele, okay, if there is a dominant allele, it completely controls the physical trait. Physical trait. So, for example, if I have a capital R, it's going to show red. Regardless of if it's homo or heterozygous, it doesn't matter. Red is a capital R. Okay. For incomplete dominance, this is the one where I said it allows for a third physical trait that is a mix between the dominant and the recessive. Okay? So, maybe you have a capital R, lowercase r, right? That no longer is red. That becomes a cross between red and white and becomes this pink color, right? So you can see in our little flower picture, we have a red dominant, we have a white, and it makes this beautiful pink flower over here, okay? Finally, we have this thing called codominance, okay? So codominance, again, to me, this is where both physical traits are shown at the same time. Okay, so you have a RW, this would be a red and white flower. Okay, so again, you have the dominant, which is in the center, and then you have the recessive, which is on the outside, right? It could also have been a striped flower or a tie-dye flower. Again, as long as you see both colors, that is the definition of codominance, all right? So again, if you have questions, if this doesn't make sense to you, again, please, I suggest that you go back and you read chapter 11, mostly section 2. Those pages are listed above. As always, you can go back and you can watch this video. You can go back and rewatch that Ed puzzle video. And then please, if that still is confusing to you, please do not hesitate to reach out, shoot me an email, a Google Hangout, something. All right. Other than that, though, hopefully this helps everybody.